Hello, I'm your host, Ray Dogum, and welcome to VibeCast. Thank you for joining us as we explore the exciting advancements in technology-enabled collaboration to excel important drug development. Join us to learn, imagine, question, and help us identify and develop solutions together. Our guest today is Richard Johnson, founder and chief scientific officer of Upperton, a UK-based company. Richard, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to talk to you again, Ray.
Yes, absolutely. And why don't we start with you giving the audience a brief background about your career so far and what sort of led you to starting Upperton?
Well, it's an interesting story. I left university after doing my PhD, and that was back in 1986. And my initial part of my career was very much in the emerging biotech industry, so working with recombinant proteins, purifying a whole range of different types of molecules. But then as part of that development process, I was working at a company called Delta Biotechnology, which still exists and is one of the oldest biotech companies in the UK. Within that company, I began to do some research work back in the early 1990s using spray drying to make particles from a recombinant protein, human albumin. And on the back of that technology, I became more and more interested in microparticles and the use of microparticles to deliver drugs. Such to the point that in 1994, myself and three other people, we led a spin-out, a management buyout, and we introduced a company called Andaris Limited, which was a drug delivery based on spray drying. So using spray drying to make particles for delivering drugs and diagnostic agents. I stayed with that company, Andaris, until 1999, when we were acquired and taken over by a UK company, which is called Vectura. I then left Andaris, and I wasn't quite sure which way my career would go, so I started a company called Upperton Pharma Solutions, initially to carry on really working as a consultant in pharmaceutical spray drying and other spray drying technologies. But as the consultancy grew and as my interest in drug delivery grew, I then acquired laboratories in the early to mid 2001, 2002, and the company started to grow quite slowly. But then in 2008, we began to take spray drying, move it from research and development into sort of more classical clinical trials manufacture. And that's where the company really started to gain momentum. And then in more recent years, when we acquired our own facilities for GMP manufacture, we effectively became a fully fledged CDMO to the point now where we continue to grow rapidly. And our service offering has grown way beyond just spray drying to the point where we're developing drug delivery formulations for a whole range of different dosage forms, from the lungs and the nose through to more traditional oral drug delivery. So really, my career is all around, has really followed the drug delivery process from its early days through to quite a range of different applications in its current form.
Very interesting. What do you think got you interested in drug delivery technologies in the first place? Is it just because you sort of were in that field as you were younger and, gained an expertise in it and wanted to refine that skill? Or was there something else that maybe
I think it's a combination of things, right? I think initially, obviously, I began to use spray drying back in the late 80s, early 1990s, when not many companies or scientists were using spray drying. And I was using it as a particle engineering technology. And I became fascinated with the different things that you could do with particles, microparticles and nanoparticles, to improve and help the way that drugs are delivered into the body. And really, that's what piqued my interest. It's that ability to take a technology like spray drying and to engineer it to make different types of products, really to overcome some of the challenges. And that could be a stability challenge, it could be a delivery challenge, it could be a solubility challenge. But the interesting thing was you could apply this really exciting technology to a whole range of different opportunities and challenges. And I think it's those technical challenges that really piqued my interest in it, Ray.
Interesting. Can you briefly explain what sorts of services drug delivery CDMOs provide to the biotech world?
Well, here at Upperton, we are a CDMO, and we're probably typical of most of the other CDMOs in the sector, in that with drug delivery, we're looking to overcome some of the challenges that pharmaceutical and biotech companies are seeing with their products. So if you take a new molecule, it could be a small molecule or a larger biologic. Quite often there are challenges, and those challenges can be quite different or varied. They can be stability challenges, they can be delivery challenges, i.e. how do you get the drug into the body, be it through the nose or the lung, or it could be a release problem, the drug's being released too quickly or too slowly. But using this, it's a very broad term, drug delivery, but by changing the properties and the way that the drug is administered and shown to the body, i.e. the delivery, you can change the properties of the drug. So, and those drug delivery requirements are so varied. As I've mentioned, the drug delivery challenge could be improving bioavailability, it could be targeting different parts of the body, it could be changing the release profile, whole range of different requirements, but all of them centered around the need to change the way that a drug goes into the body and where it then goes once it's inside the body.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And, over time, it's first started out as small molecules. Typically, you'd have to work with, maybe you'd have an API or an active pharmaceutical ingredient, and then maybe coat it with certain particles to enhance its solubility or something like that. But now, like you already mentioned, there's biologics, there's all these different types of therapies now that are involved with getting drugs to a patient. So has your business sort of, evolved over the last few years or decades even? And how has the broader industry evolved in drug delivery?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a business, we've been quite adept at using our technologies and our know-hows to meet the different challenges that have evolved over the last few years in particular. Obviously, there are a number of challenges. One of the most common challenges is solubility enhancement, bioavailability enhancement. I think there's a figure that's sort of mentioned on a regular basis that in the region of 90% of new molecules, small molecules entering the market, suffer from poor solubility and poor bioavailability. It's a big delivery challenge. If you can't get the drug into the body, if it doesn't dissolve, if it doesn't get absorbed across the membranes into the bloodstream, then you've got a challenge. And that's where, one of the key areas that we work in, enhancing solubility and bioavailability by producing, for example, amorphous spray-dried dispersions. And more recently, I think, especially since the COVID outbreak that started in 2020, there's been a huge increase in interest in delivering larger molecules, biologics. By biologics, I could mean a vaccine, I could mean a prophylactic, I could mean a peptide or a protein into different parts of the body, in particular the nose and the lung. And again, those are delivery challenges because they're very difficult to administer potentially a molecule into the nose and lung. And so we had to adapt quickly and develop new technologies to improve the delivery of these larger biologics into the nose and the lung, as well as smaller molecules, which we'd always traditionally worked with. So I think every now and again a new challenge will appear. As I mentioned, COVID, as I've mentioned, nasal delivery, pulmonary delivery. All these challenges are constantly growing in interest or growing in importance at different times. And as a business, we've managed to evolve and focus our technology into different drug delivery challenges depending on what our customers are asking.
Very interesting. And, you mentioned COVID. I think, very recently there's been a lot of talk about a vaccine using a nasal delivery method. And a lot of research has shown that it's just as effective, at delivering vaccines to people. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit and kind of share your perspective on the whole idea?
I mean, I can give you some perspective, but just to caveat that I'm not an immunologist. But we've worked on a number of COVID vaccines over the last couple of years, and certainly as a concept, delivering a vaccine to the nose is really interesting and could be really important facet in our armory against COVID. If you think about the disease itself, the virus, it goes in through the nose. The primary site of infection is through the nose. So if you can deliver a vaccine to give a really strong localized response within the nose, then that would be a fantastic way of reducing or treating COVID, or certainly improving the way that vaccines work. So we've done a lot of work looking at engineering particles in particular to carry these vaccines, first of all, from a device into the nasal cavity, but then to retain them in the nose long enough for the body to see the antigens, to see the vaccine, and to create the immune response. So I think it's a really interesting approach, nasal vaccination. There are some challenges. If you can get it to work, it would be fantastic because you get this localized response in the nose. Other advantages, you can self-administer. So imagine, there's a COVID outbreak, you need a vaccine quickly. You can go to the chemist, you can get your prescription for your vaccine in a nasal device, and you can administer it yourself. That's a huge plus in technology. The challenge comes around getting the right response, the right immunogenic response in the nose. So it's all about engineering particles that can go into the nose, carrying these vaccines, but be retained on the surface of the nose long enough to elicit that immune response. And that's where the challenge is coming in, getting a strong enough immune response within the nasal cavity. And it's something we've been working on for the last 2 or 3 years.
Interesting. Yeah, I heard, when I was doing my research, your upper nose trademark sort of product or service. Would you like to dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah,
I know we have some
why don't I
slides.
tell you a little bit about Upper Nose? It's you'll see from the name Upper Nose. Basically it's a combination of upper from Upperton and nose because it's our sort of interest in delivering molecules to the nose. And to be honest, to be brutally honest, up until 3 years ago, we'd hardly done any work in the nasal delivery area. Subsequent to COVID and subsequent to the COVID epidemic, we saw a huge increase in interest in nasal delivery. And that took us a little bit by surprise. And it was interesting that there didn't seem to be a lot of expertise out there in nasal delivery. So if you look on the next slide, Ray, you'll see that this sudden growth in interest has come about for a number of reasons. First of all, as we've mentioned with COVID, there was a lot of interest being created since around about 2020 in not only delivering vaccines to the nose, but other molecules as well. For example, antivirals. So again, to stop the virus getting into the body. Also looking at immune stimulators. We've been working with a number of products that are designed to uplift and stimulate the immune system in the nose. So by delivering these molecules into the nose, you can actually improve the way that the body can then react to a virus challenge like with COVID. So I think COVID had a big part to play, particularly in the delivery of biologics to the nasal membrane. But also I think another product which was recently launched, a product called Baqsimi, which is a glucagon dose that can be delivered to patients in diabetic coma. And this is a drug that isn't designed to treat or to sort of interact with the nasal membrane. It's actually a more traditional systemic drug. And this drug, Baqsimi, the Baqsimi formulation can be delivered into the nose in a diabetic patient and can very quickly deliver glucagon into the bloodstream. And I think this is a really interesting thought that not only can you get drugs that can act on the surface of the nose, you can actually deliver into the bloodstream very quickly and very efficiently through a nasal administration. So taking away the need for needles, taking away the need for a qualified practitioner to inject you, you can actually take your own dose and deliver something systemically across the nasal membranes. So again, that's a second factor that's really growing, piquing people's interest in the fact that you can potentially deliver drugs into the body, into the systemic circulation via the nose. And the third area that, again, that's grown in traction and grown in interest in the last 2 or 3 years is this potential to deliver from nose directly into the brain. So by firing a drug via a device, a liquid or a powder device, you can deliver the drug into the nose and then across the blood-brain barrier directly into the brain. And again, that's a really interesting way of potentially treating a number of diseases such as Parkinson's and depression. And a lot of this interest has been around for a while, but particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, been a huge upsurge in interest in nasal delivery. But what was apparent was, as a company ourselves and other companies as well, wasn't a great deal of capability and know-how around nasal delivery. And we got a huge increase in numbers of customers coming to us with their molecules, small molecules and larger molecules. And so they were saying, well, we want to deliver this to the nose, but we don't really know how we're going to do it. We don't know whether it's going to be a liquid or a powder. Can you help us? So actually, we devised our own nasal delivery platform. This is what Upper Nose is. It's a series of platforms or steps which can take a customer from an initial phone call or initial contact right through to clinical manufacture. We call this the Upper Nose pathway. So if you look on the next slide, Ray, we can see that we tried to break down nasal dosage form development into a number of steps, a number of relatively simple steps. And this is our Upper Nose development pathway. Starting on the left with the target product profile, it's really important that when you're developing a nasal product that you anticipate or you understand how often you're going to deliver the drug, how many doses, the frequency of doses. That'll help us decide which type of device that we want and which type of formulation we want for the customer's drug. We'll then take that drug and do some stability screening. So when I say drug, it could be a small molecule, it could be a biologic, but we'll take that drug and we'll do a series of pre-formulation screens, which will include things like stability, looking at API excipient interactions, looking at the basic stability of the molecule. Because within these first two steps, we will decide as a business with our partner, are we going to develop a dry powder formulation or are we going to develop a liquid formulation? And that's a really important point, because when you fix that choice of device, it'll then subsequently dictate the full formulation development pathway. So you can see in red there, the third step is all around selecting the dosage form between liquid and dry powder, single shot or multi-dose. So we'll go through that process of pre-formulation screening. We'll select a device, and we work with a number of different devices. We're not tied to any one nasal delivery device. We'll choose what we think is the best device for our customer, and then we'll do a full formulation development, and we'll manufacture toxicology batches, etc., help our customers with their regulatory submission to the point where we can then take the customer forward into clinical manufacture. And that whole process, the whole upper nose platform, can be up to 12 weeks.
Wow.
So from 12 weeks from an initial phone call, we can take a customer through that early selection process, the pre-formulation screening, the choice of device, and then manufacture batches of liquid or powder nasal formulations that can be delivered by device and tested. And at that point, we'll be in a position where we can then start clinical manufacture. So the whole process taking 12 weeks. But I think in having this development platform, we're able to take customers through a really defined process of formulation and device selection. So drug delivery at its best and quickest, and it's really come out in the last couple of years and driven by the demand for nasal delivery.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. 12 weeks seems like quite a short amount of time to get this all done. So that's awesome for you having been able to formulate a pathway for your clients to do this. I think that's helpful for everyone, for patients, for your clients as well. A couple of questions I had. So, just thinking about how, you mentioned Baqsimi and how it could deliver glucagon into patients through the nose. Are there alternatives for insulin delivery through the nose too? Because there's, I'm sure, lots of different requests for that too.
Yeah, I mean, I in my career, I was involved. Yeah, possible, yes. I think there was a lot of interest, and I'm going back probably 15 years or so ago in pulmonary delivery of insulin, so inhaling insulin into the lung. And there must have been 9 or 10 late-stage clinical processes projects looking at delivery of insulin, so replacing needles with inhaled insulin. So you could inhale insulin into the lung and deliver the insulin that way. At least two of those products got onto the market, but one of them, the lead product, which was developed by Pfizer, then ran into some toxicity issues, and they pulled that product off the market. And I think that whole insulin delivery route took a big bit of a battering. All of the inhaled insulin products bar one that were then pulled off development. So I think, yes, there is potential for delivery of insulin, but you're right, if I was looking to deliver it through another route, I'd be looking at the nose rather than the lung. But there are challenges, and I think the challenges that were found with pulmonary delivery have maybe frightened people off a little bit around looking for alternatives for insulin delivery. And to be fair, insulin delivery now, these very small needle devices, they're so efficient and so relatively pain-free that I think it would take a lot for people to switch now, having been through that pulmonary delivery process and it's failed. I don't think there's anybody looking now at nasal delivery of insulin, but it's certainly possible, I would suspect.
What are some of the common challenges pharmaceutical companies face when integrating new drug delivery technologies into their pipelines? And you've mentioned you have a lot of clients, approaching you with their problems. So what are some of those challenges? Well,
I think the challenges in terms of how they can incorporate drug delivery into their processes is, in a way, it's the same challenges that you have when you're developing more traditional drug formulations. You're always looking at things like stability, delivery, the delivery sort of window, if you like, the therapeutic window. All of the challenges that you have in a normal formulation development of a drug product are the same as with drug delivery products. Drug delivery products are just doing things, or formulations are just doing things a little bit smarter, a little bit quicker, using slightly different ways into the body or controlling different releases. But the challenges remain the same. Everything from formulation development, stability, delivering the right dose. They're effectively the same, I would say. You're just using slightly different routes or mechanisms to get the drug where it needs to go.
Interesting. I've always thought of receiving drugs intravenously as probably the most controlled because a physician or a doctor can, or nurse practitioner or something can really control the dosage because it's going straight to the bloodstream. I wonder when you use one of these alternative drugs through the nose, is there a um, sort of maybe a tolerance that's individually based on each person's different nose, or because it's not going directly into the blood? So is there like a variability in terms of how each individual
I,
absorbs?
yeah, I think that's a good point, Ray. You're right. The most direct way of getting a drug into the body is, as you say, by an infusion or by an injection, um, and you can deliver a precise dose. But also, bear in mind that that is not cheap. That's not an inexpensive way to deliver a drug. Having one or more clinicians standing beside you administering a drug into the body. If you can administer a drug yourself, it'll be much cheaper and much more efficient to then administer yourself every day, for example. So I think you're right. I think you can probably get a more accurate or more defined dose through an injection or through a needle or an infusion. But you've got to balance that up with cost and efficiency. Compare that to a nasal delivery where particularly for drugs where you have a fairly wide therapeutic window, then that becomes more interesting because you're not, so some drugs you need a very tight dose to be delivered. Other drugs you have quite a wide window. And if you can deliver a drug that'll give you a dose within that therapeutic window through the nasal passage, it's got to be much cheaper and better for the patient and more patient friendly than having to deliver it through a needle or through an injection or an infusion in some way. So I think you're right. It's probably applicable to broader therapeutic windows, and it would be through an injection or an infusion. But also bear in mind that cost is a big part of this. And if you can administer yourself, if you can go to the chemist or go to the practitioner and receive some doses and administer that drug yourself, it's got to be a cheaper and a more patient-friendly way of administering a drug.
Yeah, that's definitely a big benefit here, the cost factor. And, as long as the specific drugs that are being used in formulations are in the range where it's going to be
Yeah.
effective and you're not going to overdose or something like that, it should be okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you have to go through extensive studies and clinical trials to ensure that there's no extreme, variability here.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, the challenges are the same, whether it's an injectable formulation or an oral formulation or a more advanced, for example, nasal or drug delivery formulation. You still have targets, therapeutic windows that you need to hit, and you need to show that in a clinical study. So the challenges are the same. But if you can crack that nasal delivery, if you can get your product delivered via the nose rather than by an injection, and get the right hit the therapeutic window, deliver the right amount of drug, then nasal delivery has some really exciting opportunities.
So are your clients typically early stage biotech looking to take their first or second drug into the market, or are they big pharma companies typically? I'm asking because I'm wondering, how are your clients funded themselves?
I think that's a good question. I think Upperton as a company, Upperton Pharma Solutions, we have about 100 people in our organization, most of them scientists. But I think that really makes us an interesting CDMO, but we're not a big CDMO. And I think it's fair to say that the big pharma companies would or tend to go to the big CDMOs. You know who they are, who the big players are in the CDMO world. Quite often the big pharma companies will go to the big CDMOs. They're used to working with them. They look at Upperton as a relatively small specialist CDMO. And what that means is that most of our customers come from that sort of smaller, mid-sized to smaller pharma and biotech industry company. So basically, a lot of the companies that come to us tend to be very small. They have a limited amount of funding. They tend to be relatively cash rich, but time poor. And they want a CDMO that will work with them closely, integrate with them, and help them through their development process. And that's probably where most of our customers fall, in that sort of small pharma, small biotech, through to mid-range size company. Most of those companies are raising money through, traditionally through venture capitalist funds, for example. Some of them are spin-outs. Some of them have some industry funding, so funding from larger pharma companies. I don't think there's any one particular form of funding or source of funding, but I would say as a business, we tend to specialise and work most closely with small pharma, small biotech. A lot of them are virtual as well. They don't have their own laboratories. They like to outsource everything. And that's why they come to us, because they'll bring their molecule quite often in a small amount, just a few milligrams in a little container, and say, can you turn this into a drug product? And we'll work closely with them and we'll do that. And we'll do everything for them, from formulation development through to manufacture, through to helping them on the regulatory side, etc. We give them a full service providing all on the same site here in Nottingham.
That's excellent. What does it typically cost for a biotech startup to manufacture their formulation to gear up for a clinical study? And I know there's a huge range here, but just to kind of get an idea.
I find it hard to answer that question, because when you say manufacture, before you hit that manufacturing stage, you could easily have spent 6 to 9 months developing and proving that you have a formulation that works. And then the cost of manufacture can vary from, depending on the size of the batch, on the dosage form, whether it's a simple, API or powder in a capsule, through to a product that's actually filled into a device, a nasal or a pulmonary device. So you could be looking, from a few tens of thousands to a few hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the type of dosage form and the size of the batch and how long it's taking you to develop that. And then all the subsequent testing and stability that goes with it. So it's a very broad range, Ray, depending on the dosage form and the type of molecule.
I appreciate that. What are some of the emerging trends in drug delivery tech that excites you the most?
I think we talked about one earlier, nasal delivery, but I won't go over that again. But you can see that I'm very passionate about nasal delivery. Another area that we're seeing some interest in now is in sort of longer-acting drug formulations. So traditionally drugs that are delivered or either orally or nasally or through injection every day, trying to find formulations where patients can switch from once a day, twice a day to once a week, once a month, once every 3 months. Because patient compliance is a big factor in drugs not working well. It's a big problem for patients and practitioners. Drugs that need to be taken every day, and you can imagine the different disease states. For example, things like statins, things like various HIV treatments. You have to take these every day, and if you don't take them every day, the patient is at risk. So we're quite interested in some sort of longer acting, less frequently delivered formulations. So technologies that can deliver drugs that can provide a dose over maybe a month or 3 months rather than every day. We're seeing some interest in that area, and I think that's going to be a big growth area for us in the future.
That is interesting. Well, Richard, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today and speaking to us about your upper nose technology, as well as the industry in general and drug delivery. Where can our listeners stay updated on the latest advancements and news related to Upperton Pharma?
Well, in the first instance, obviously, you can go to our website and or you can go on our LinkedIn portal. On LinkedIn, you'll find us quite easily. But also, obviously, you have a big US audience, I imagine. I am actually coming over to the US on a number of occasions in the fall. For example, we're giving some seminars in the Boston area, the week beginning the 10th, 11th of September onwards. So if anybody would like to catch up with us, if they contact me before the 10th of September, I'm happy. Myself and a colleague are coming over to the US. So if you're in the Boston area, drop us a line and we'll come and talk to you, or come to one of our seminars in the Boston area in that week. Otherwise, just contact us and we're happy to talk to customers and provide information through webinars, through calls or whatever.
Excellent. And we'll be sure to include that information in the description and show notes of this episode. So, Richard, thank you again. I hope you have a great day.